Hello, I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. Today in the studio, I'm indeed thrilled to have as my new friend, Sister Mary Catherine from Italy, who's been a nun in Italy for 35 years, but she is an American and grew up in New York, and it's just a thrill to have you. Welcome, Sister Mary Catherine.
Thank you.
Sister Mary Catherine and I met at St. Francis Cathedral Basilica literally last week. However, I'd seen her here before visiting her sister, who is a retired doctor living here in town, and her brother-in-law, who is actually running one of the cameras today. So it's great to have you.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here.
I saw this sister's devotion in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I said, I got to meet this gal. And sure enough, she was talking to a friend of mine, Corinna, and we got introduced, and it was like we were just fast friends from before, and it just took off from there and had a lot of great conversations. I said, please come in and share some of that with us. So here we are, just like yesterday. Tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, where you grew up and your family and all that sort of thing, and then eventually how you became a nun.
Well, I was born in New York City, grew up in White Plains, New York, of a non-practicing Jewish family. We had no religion in our family, something that as the years of my young life drew on was something that I felt very much lacking in my life and I wanted to have, but we had no religion whatsoever. I did manage to go to Sunday school with some friends. My mother permitted me to do that. And I got a Bible with my name embossed in gold for perfect attendance at I think a Presbyterian Sunday school, which our St. Bernard dog later chewed up, unfortunately, before I got a chance to read it. But throughout the years, I always had a longing for God. I remember in junior high, before going off on the wrong path, I used to go at lunchtime into a church near our school instead of going to lunch, and I would pray, and I learned different prayers from things that I read there, and it was really an uplifting thing in my life. But then, unfortunately, I guess, like the parable of the good seed that is thrown on the path and is eaten up by the birds, I went in the wrong direction, unfortunately.
How old were you when you started to go that way? Teenager?
I guess about, well, even younger, because we used to go around as kids and do kinds of, sort of juvenile delinquency things in the neighborhood, although I was from so-called upper middle class
But it was common amongst your peers and that sort of thing. You were just one of the girls, right? Sort of thing.
Well, it was mostly with my brother. But
tell us about your family. How many children in your family?
We're four. I have two sisters and a brother.
And what number are you?
I'm the middle sister.
Okay.
And the only Christian in our family so far. And so I just, got into
trouble.
Yeah, all kinds of trouble.
Yeah.
And further and further away from what I've later found.
Yeah.
But the Lord was always there in some way, though I wasn't maybe aware of it. Mm-hmm. But He did bring me back. Do you want me to tell you about that?
Well, yeah, but listen, these things are pretty common. I went to parochial grammar school as a Roman Catholic, and I wanted to go to seminary out of the 8th grade, and my parents wouldn't let me. They said, if you want to go, you can go after college. Right. Well, to an 8th grader, that's the other side of the moon. So there's not many people who go the straight and narrow the whole way, so it's not that uncommon.
Right. And my mother used to say, when you are 21, you can decide what you want to believe in. And I was jealous of a girl who left the public school that I was in to go to a parochial school, because nuns did have a fascination for me. I thought they had a secret that I wasn't privy to, and I wanted to know what it was that they had. And also I remember when we moved to a new house in White Plains, the people who had left a television set, and I found quite by chance Bishop Sheen, Fulton Sheen, and I would sit and watch, although I didn't understand what he was talking about, and Oral Roberts healing services. And I would put my hand on the television as a point of contact and pray the prayers with him. And, you know, it was something that was happening in my life, although I was going in another direction. He was always there.
So you're going both ways at the same time almost.
Yeah, but then I really did leave, and I went down to Greenwich Village after, I went to college at New York University. I lived in the Village and kind of went my own way. And it was through a very unhappy experience that the Lord really brought me back to himself in quite a phenomenal and supernatural way.
Okay, before we go that deep right now, just out of curiosity, what did you choose to study when you went off to college?
I chose philosophy and languages. I chose French, Spanish, and Italian. And philosophy because I always had a desire to go deeper into the spiritual reality, but I didn't.
No other members of your family had a spiritual calling at all? Aunts, uncles, grandparents?
Some of them were practicing Jews. We used to make fun of them in our family because we were kind of the kids.
That's common.
We didn't have any respect, so to speak, unfortunately, for religion or their religion.
So then tell us then, how did it begin going in the right direction, as you say?
Well, as I say, I went through a very unhappy experience when I was living in Greenwich Village, which I won't go into the details of, but I was wandering around the village really miserable and suffering, and a friend of mine saw me and asked me what had happened, and I told him, and he said, come on over to my house and we'll talk about it. So I did, and we were sitting on the couch and talking, and I was probably crying. And at a certain point of the conversation, he just stopped talking, and I all of a sudden became aware of what my soul was, and it was just a really horrible view that I had, not of images or anything, you've done this or you've done that, but just a spiritual interior vision. It's been so long now I can't remember precisely, but at that moment I felt as though I were dying to see what I really was in the depths of my soul. I remember that in psychology courses I took in the university, I had decided if ever I saw a truth, I would not deny it, I would not look the other way. So rather than just turning aside from this horrible thing that I was seeing, I looked steadily at it. And later in life, I realized that what had probably happened was I repented of it. I mean, I was truly sorry in my heart for this condition that was prevalent in my life, that was sin, and it was just a horrible thing to see. And at that very moment, there was all I remember is vaguely like a crack of thunder or lightning or something, and I was lifted up out of myself to a very, very high place. I mean, it was just a phenomenal thing, totally life-changing, and I don't know how long it lasted. It was probably a matter of 15 or 20 or 30 seconds. But in that brief moment, God, whom I did not believe in at that point, but He gave me this complete peace and exoneration, I guess, from the rest of my life, and showed me the way that I had to go now. And, not just you do this, you do that, but just an interior elan for what I was to do. And when I came back to this place where I was sitting with this person, I was just completely changed and knew that I would never do anything but follow this, and that if I immediately said to myself, if you ever lose this vision or just this experience, you're really the biggest fool that ever walked on the earth, because it was something so totally extraordinary. And that became my path, and for the next 3 years, I was 23 at the time, for the next 3 years I studied. I was living in New York City, so I had access to many cultural and religious and spiritual kinds of things, and I studied Oriental religions. I felt as though there was this music playing within me, and I wanted to find the words that corresponded to it. And to some degree, Buddhism, Hinduism, Zen, because they all seem to say, this is it, this is the path. But I never would say, I'm a Buddhist or I'm this. But when somebody tried to talk to me about Christianity, I remember saying to him, yes, but Buddhism is the same thing. Because to me, it was my spiritual search, and it was, leading me step by step. But at a certain point, I met this person who had once preached to me the gospel, and I met him again out in Berkeley, California, and we went to the campus, and as he was speaking to me, totally apart from what he was saying, the Lord revealed to me within my heart and my head, my mind, like the tumblers of a lock falling into place, that Jesus Christ was my Savior. He had redeemed me. And I knew at that moment that I was a Christian, and that was the highest revelation. It was higher than any of the spirituality that I had sincerely and seriously been considering and following and studying. And so from that moment, I was a Christian, and that became, a new path of finding my way. I began to read the gospel. Well, actually, I had been reading the gospel as I had been reading the Upanishads and various things. I was at a certain point working at the cloisters in New York, the medieval department of the Metropolitan, and so I was reading the gospel as I went to work. And at a certain point, I realized that Jesus was the center of this whole museum, but I wasn't yet a Christian. It was on a vacation from that job that I...
Let me interrupt you just for a minute here, because that's quite a story we've had so far, but I want to go back for a moment for those who have not had anything like this. I'm curious about your concept or your perception of the soul experience. Back on your friend's couch or talking, where before this event happened, that you were looking at your own soul. Where did this concept come to you if you had no religious or spiritual background?
I really had no concept of anything. I mean, when God shines his light on you, and the beautiful part of it was that I can never forget and never be grateful enough for, is that when you cry out for help, when you're really down and in need, and sometimes that's what it takes to cry out for help. And I did not cry out, I didn't know that I had, but my heart did cry out, and he was there, just like it says, I don't know if it's the Psalms where he says, when you call, I'm there immediately. And that was true. And so I didn't know anything about my soul. I only knew that what he showed me was true, even though, as I said, it wasn't, showing specific things. You've done this, you've done that, you haven't walked the right, straight and narrow or whatever. It wasn't that. It was an interior view that I had never even imagined or conceived of before. But that was for God, I guess, the way that he had chosen to lead me step by step to knowing him, which became the joy and the desire of my life, was just to know him more. Because when you're just at the depths of despair and someone comes and lifts you up, and it's somebody that you don't know, and it's God, and it's invisible and spiritual, your life is just changed. And as I say, I could never do anything but follow that with my whole life, although now I am doing it in a more concerted way since becoming a nun. But always I was on that path. I mean,
Okay.
ever since this experience, and I never could
Okay,
let it go.
that's great. I interrupted you when you
That's
realized
okay.
you became a Christian. So now let's go back there, and then what happened next after you made the realization, another amazing realization that, oh my God, I'm a Christian. I believe this
Yeah,
stuff.
well,
What happened next?
I began to read the Bible, read the Gospels, just over and over again. I was living in Berkeley, and I didn't link up with any church because I didn't really know what to do or where to go. It was just kind of this self-taught thing, but I did meet a lot of people who were Christians, and little by little I started going to various groups and various churches, and I wound up at one church, which was a charismatic church that had people from all different denominations who were going there, and we did a lot of work. Like, we would go to women's prisons, we would preach on the street, we would have prayer meetings, Bible studies. It was just a full-time, beautiful experience. And one thing that we would do when our pastor, who was a woman, and I heard her first on the radio, I thought it was a man because she had a very deep voice, but she would quote the Psalms that said, thou art holy, thou who dwellest in the praises of Israel. And their feeling was that in praising God, in opening up your heart to praise Him, He would dwell in that praise. He would come closer to you, draw close to you, and you would be closer to Him. And I found that was true, a very uplifting experience. And we would do this in the congregation and during, before she would give a very deep and spiritual homily. So I stayed there for a couple of years. Then I went to one of these Christian communes in Berkeley. It was called Christian World Liberation Front. I was not too involved in that, but I did live there. I just wanted to fellowship with other people and talk about the Lord and pray and grow and learn. And so then I started just going to many, many different churches, trying to find the one that I really felt at home at. And it was years. When I became a Christian, actually, I was 26, 3 years after this big experience I had had. And then it wasn't for 10 years, and that I in Italy, I found this community and did become a religious a few years later. But I spent a lot of time witnessing to people. I would pick people up. You could do that then, people hitchhiking. I would visit, somebody introduced me to someone who was in prison, and I would visit him and talk to him. And and they would refer to me as the preacher later, sometimes on Berkeley on Telegraph Avenue. And
did you actually get baptized at any point?
I did. In this
Okay.
charismatic church, I did get baptized by immersion, and came out speaking in tongues. And I think I did get the baptism in the Holy Spirit. And but I never really settled on a church and said, this is really my home, though I would frequent churches and meetings all the time, a lot of home meetings with the people in Berkeley. There were a lot of Christian communities that...
So when was your first experience with Catholicism?
Well, actually in Berkeley, I worked for a woman who was a nun, and she was a teacher at GTU, the Graduate Theological Union. And I would go to her house and do a little bit of secretarial work for her. And I really enjoyed that because she loved the women mystics like St. Teresa of Avila, St. Catherine of Siena. She called her Kathy and Tess. And, she was a great woman.
Do you remember what order she was? What nun?
She might have been Dominican. I really don't.
Because one of the schools at GTU is Dominican, Jesuit, and Franciscan.
She might have been.
Okay.
Yeah. And I took some courses there also.
But anyhow, go ahead.
So that was, I would go to the Catholic Church, but I had no idea. I would receive Holy Communion. I didn't realize, you can't just go in and take Holy Communion, but I would. Nobody taught or instructed me. And I loved going into Catholic churches because I felt that there was a very special presence there that I didn't find. I used to go into churches and just pray for long periods of time, but when I would go into a Catholic church, and there was the Newman Center on Dwight Way in Berkeley, there I would feel something. I didn't understand why people genuflected, went down on one knee before the Blessed Sacrament, but I did feel something so wonderful there. And so later on, when I worked in a mental hospital, the Institute of Living in Hartford.
Connecticut?
Yeah. I used to drive around to find Catholic churches, and that's where I used to like to go to pray, because that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to be with the Lord and pray and help people, because I had a love in my heart for people, and I wanted to share with them what I had found in whatever way. Of course, in the Institute, I actually did get fired from there, I think. Well, anyway, we won't go into that. But
so when did you become a Catholic? I'm kind of curious.
Well, I didn't become a Catholic until my sister and I, on a trip, we decided to go to Europe together, and by divine providence, I met this very small community out on the Appia Antica in Rome, and there I talked to the Father, who was the founder of the Fraternity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That's the order I belong to now. Father Theodosius of the Cross. He was a Greek Orthodox who became a Catholic, and he was ordained a priest by Cardinal Siri of Genoa. A very holy man, a very deeply spiritual man, a wonderful person. And so through a friend of my sister's, with whom she did some pre-med studies at Columbia, and who was at medical school in Rome, I went out to this community and one Sunday, and there, I don't know, it was quite an experience, because I did understand the homily of Father Theodosius, and at a certain point the floodgates burst and I just started crying and crying and crying, and I didn't know why, but he later told me, because I went to see him the next day, that it was when he had said, some people ask themselves, why have I suffered so much? I never would have thought that would be what sparked me, but I was alone at that point in Europe. My sister had gone, and I was suffering a lot from loneliness and, waiting to meet somebody with whom we had decided to go to Greece. When the time came, she was not at the meeting place, so I went back to the fraternity. And the Father asked me if I'd like to do a retreat there and just stay for 2 weeks and pray and try and see what God was telling me in my life, which I did. He gave me the opportunity to live in a beautiful apartment on the Trastevere in Rome, and with another person who would come to the fraternity every day for Mass and Vespers. So I did a lot of praying, and after 2 weeks, my conclusion was that God really showed me, if God is God, you have to serve him. I mean, you can't just say, I know God, I love God, but I've got a lot of other things to do. I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to become a religious, but he does. He warrants and merits being first in our lives, and that's what I really wanted to do, was put him first in my life. So little by little, looking around this community at the sisters, there were only about 8 at that time, and a wonderful, wonderful mother who was also of Jewish background and who had become a Catholic through this Father Theodosius. And I just loved the people, the sisters, and we had brothers who were priests in a villa across the street in Rome. And so I just thought, nothing is keeping me back from just entering and seeing if this works, because it's not something you just enter and that's it. But there's a time of retreat, which I did. I was there for about 6 months. Then I went back to the United States to decide if indeed I wanted to join, and I did. And I came back and became a postulant for well, it wasn't quite a year. and then a novice for 3 years, and then you receive the black veil and scapular as a professed religious. And it's a beautiful family. You know, it's not my sister Anne, when she came to visit me, she said, I thought I'd find you on your knees scrubbing cement floors, and I find you in a summer camp. And in a way, it's like that, because there's a lot of, you know, it's a close relationship. It's not with all of the sisters, and there's no formality. We have we've now moved to Bagnoregio, which is 2 hours north of Rome, in Upper Lazio, which is the province in which Rome is. And we're in the country. We have gardens. We raise vegetables and flowers. I do a lot of the flower gardening. I do translating work of Father Theodosius' homilies and other things. And we do a lot of music. Most of the sisters play musical instruments, and we do a lot of Baroque and Renaissance music. We sing for Mass. We sing Gregorian chant for the Masses, and we used to have the Mass in Latin, but now it's in Italian, now that we've come to Bagnoregio. But I did play piano when I was young, and I loved playing the piano, but I decided that I wanted my instrument to be prayer, and that was really my desire, was to, you know, not just to enjoy the life of the community, but to spiritually get as close to God as I could, which means a discipline and spending time reading, yes, to encourage you, but mostly just being in His presence and you know, not so much words and concepts and formal prayers. I mean, I'm finding this is how it's turned out, but just being with Him and getting to a deeper union of heart with Him. And this has been the joy of my life, and something that has brought me really to the point where I can say I'm really happy in my heart, which is what everybody's searching for. And when I came to that conclusion, I was just, you know, overwhelmed with joy to realize that He had really given me that. And I have that wherever I go. It's not just being in the community with people surrounding you who love you, but it's being with Him everywhere. And, you know, it's just a phenomenal and marvelous thing that I think everybody is called to. This is why we're here, is to find this fulfillment that can only come through being united in heart with Him. And this is what He wants, and He is truly the lover of our soul, truly our friend, and, you know, so close that, you know, we usually project this concept of God as this, that, or the other, you know, the policeman or the this or that. But He's not. He's the one that we seek in our deepest friendships and our loves and in everything. It is He, and we really don't need anybody but Him. But He, in His goodness, just gives us the freedom to choose whatever life, whatever lifestyle we want, and promises. Am I going too far?
Promises what?
Promises that He will fulfill.
Okay. I hate to interrupt, but we've run out of time.
Okay.
It's been wonderful sharing. You have
Thank
to
you.
come back and tell us more.
Thank you.
So on behalf of everybody here, Spirituality, my guest, Sister Mary Catherine, thank you for coming and sharing.
Thank
Please
you.
come back.
Thank you.
And our director, Marshall, help behind the scenes with George, our camera people, Casey, and Sister Mary Catherine's brother-in-law, Richard. Thank you for viewing. Please stay tuned next week at this time for another program on spirituality, and good day.